that Private Manning was in prison without trial, which I think sent a strong message to the military. The people were paying attention to this case, and the people were concerned about unconstitutional aspects of this case. On the first day of the trial, there were 1,000 people, over 1,000 people, present at Fort Meade, Maryland. So we've sent a message so far that people care about this case, and I think that it's helped to change the public dialogue. Not everything has gone our way, but there are many people out there, many journalists, Nobel Peace Prize laureates, celebrities who've spoken up for Private Manning. Private Manning was even included recently in a short list of people who were asked by Time magazine what they were thankful for this Thanksgiving. So I think thanks to the efforts of our volunteers and our supporters, Private Manning's story is not yet over. Chelsea's story will continue. There's still work to be done, but there's also a lot to be hopeful about. So I thank you all for being here tonight. And stick around, we'll tell you more about what you can do to help, and why you can help, and why there's reason to have hope. Thank you.
Our next speaker, David Coombs, was lead defense attorney in the U.S. versus Private First Class Bradley Manning trial this summer. He is a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserves, has done 12 years active duty, and has been practicing and teaching criminal law for over 15 years. He's regarded by colleagues and peers as one of the best attorneys in the U.S. Army, and he plans to continue working as an advocate for Private Manning in the years to come. So let's hear it for David Coombs.
A very warm welcome. I want to start off today by saying how good it is to see so many people that I recognize from the trial, actually, who came and showed up to support Chelsea during her time of need. And I want to also tell you that coming here tonight, I prepared some remarks of what I wanted to say. And you'll have to forgive me if today my remarks seem a little disjointed. And the reason why is this morning I went for a run. And what I saw actually changed what I was going to say here today. And so I'm not going to give the remarks that I had prepared. That may be scary for some. For me, a little scary as well. But stick with me and we'll see how we do. As I said, I went this morning for a run, and Emma, you're right. This is not a cold winter's night. This is a balmy summer day. And I went for a run on the beach, which is a luxury for anyone on the East Coast. And so I decided to go for that run, and I was having a great time running down the beach. And I came to the Santa Monica Pier, and this was roughly around 7 in the morning. And the only other people out there were fellow runners. And I looked to my left, and I saw a couple men putting red and white crosses into the sand. And when I looked there, I didn't know, without really knowing what they were doing, I immediately thought kind of how powerful that message was to see that. And it was very poignant for me as a military member to see that, because the first thought that came to my mind was my fellow brothers and sisters in arms. And I looked there and I thought, crosses in the sand. It was a message in its simplicity that was very powerful to me. So I stopped and I walked up to one of the gentlemen. I wasn't shaven. I looked a little rough because I'd run at that point a few miles. And for me, that's sometimes hard. And the gentleman explained to me the significance of what he was doing. And after my run, I continued to think about that. And I told myself I wanted to go back when the memorial was complete. And so I decided I'd have lunch back at the Santa Monica Pier. I'd go back and take a look at the memorial. And when I went back, I was very impressed with the displays that were there and how powerful it was and how it captured not only the human but the monetary loss to our country from both the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Later, I went upstairs above it, and there was a restaurant there, and I decided to have lunch. And I looked at the memorial, actually, from my seat. I could see the memorial and people taking photographs. And as I ate lunch, I started to think about tonight. And what I was going to say, and what was coming to me as I was watching people, everyday people, just walking by this memorial, some taking photographs, and some taking the time to stop and breathe. And so I started to jot out my thoughts, and I didn't have paper, but what I did have was an napkin. So I started to write out this speech, and it was basically just a rough draft. But then I took that napkin and I went back to my hotel, and I started to write this speech out. And when I first thought of what I wanted to say today, I entitled my remarks, VFW Arlington West Memorial Speech. And this is that speech. Since 2011, 7,678 men and women, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, have given their life to our country. And they've given their life selflessly because they believed in what they were doing. What these 7,678 men and women could have accomplished in this world had they not committed that sacrifice, we'll never know. War has been said at times to be a necessary evil. And accepting that proposition to be true for a moment, whenever we do go to war, obviously we need to ensure that we do so for the right reasons. We need to ensure that we do so with all the information, importantly, all the truthful information. And unfortunately, some of the decisions that we've made as a country, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, have been based upon less than truthful information, sometimes outright lies. And in June of 2010, Chelsea understood this. At that time, she had elected to do an incredible, dangerous thing for her, but also an incredibly brave thing. She elected to tell the truth and to expose the truth. Think about this for a moment. Over 1 million people had access to the information that Chelsea released. The SIPRNet is a secret internet protocol network that the Department of Defense runs on. And all the information that Chelsea exposed was available on that. And you have over 1 million people with access to the SIPRNet. Yet no one before her spoke out. And why not? The answer is simple. It takes incredible courage to speak out when your country wishes you to remain silent. So why did Chelsea speak out? In 2010, Chelsea was in Iraq. She was trying to do what she believed was her mission, and the mission that her unit was trying to accomplish, and that was enforce the rule of law and help Iraq build a responsive, representative government. And she viewed her job as an intelligence analyst as a very important part of that goal. Prior to her deployment, she took it upon herself to read a lot more, to educate herself about that area that her unit was going to read about the various fractions that were in Iraq, to understand some of the motivations behind the people that lived there. And she wanted to do that in order to make herself more well-rounded. And Chelsea was hoping that she could take that information and apply that to her job. And ultimately, that would mean that she would save lives. That's how she viewed her job. And as a humanist, Chelsea felt a great responsibility and duty to people. And within a very short period of time, she found herself faced with information that she couldn't ignore. And as she later would write, it was something that she couldn't just keep inside of her head. She realized that as good as our country is, we don't always do the right things. And sometimes, especially in Iraq, we turn a blind eye to torture. Sometimes we didn't do everything we could do in order to ensure that innocent civilians were not killed. And sometimes, as she later found out, our country didn't always deal with other countries in a way in which we would be proud of. So over the course of several months, she provided, as you know, WikiLeaks with documents that made headlines around the world. Now, her releases to WikiLeaks were contrary to what our government wanted, obviously. And these releases did not make our government look good in many instances. But they did a lot of good. People can differ on how much it did, but I think if you do some research, you'll see that the releases led to the end of the Iraq War. It's clear. Iraq, once they were made aware of the number of civilian casualties, started to insist on the ability to have court-martial-like jurisdiction, criminal jurisdiction, over American soldiers. That, of course, was something that the United States would not put up with, and quickly we left Iraq. It also exposed to a lot of people just how many civilian lives were lost, and the true cost of the Iraq campaign, and later the Afghanistan campaign. For some who thought Guantanamo was filled with the worst of the worst, the type of people that you would never want to see released, the documents showed that in many cases, these people were either completely innocent or just individuals who, because there was some sort of dispute, they were turned in for a bounty because America was paying money for basically information on individuals that we believed were the Taliban or who were part of Al-Qaeda. So you have people who absolutely would not need to be incarcerated, let alone be held in Guantanamo at the expense of roughly $1 million a year for each person, being held there and being, us, the American public, being told that it was because these were the worst of the worst. In other instances, they clearly were either Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, but they were low-level operatives. So this information exposed that and showed that to the American public. But what it probably did, most importantly, and we'll see, time will tell how much this has affected us as a country, but it did lead to the Arab Spring. And it brought democracy to countries that previously, that was not a hope. And we'll see whether or not it brings in the Middle East into the modern age, and hopefully it does. But as I said, these releases were not authorized, and they did not make the government look good. This was not the type of release that Bob Woodward would write about in a book. So shortly after these releases, President Obama condemned the leaks. Secretary Clinton called it an attack on our diplomacy. High-ranking military officials said that those who released the information, in this case Chelsea and WikiLeaks, had blood on their hands, and said that it would lead to the loss of American soldier lives, and it also would lead to the loss of lives of people who were helping us. Well, 3 years later, all of those predictions, those dire consequences, none of those came true. And not only did none of those come true, but when the government started to talk about this, you would think that the world was coming to an end. The sky was actually falling. But the sky didn't fall, and the world didn't come to an end, and diplomacy didn't end. If anything, we got a peek into what our government does on a daily basis. In some cases that's good, in other cases we as citizens who vote in our elected representatives should have had this information. And in the appropriate circumstance, we should ask our country to deal with its counterparts in a better manner. But in addition to exaggerating the potential damage, the government also tried to marginalize Chelsea. The government's efforts to marginalize Chelsea was made easier by an all-too-compliant mainstream media. A mainstream media that, instead of engaging in proper investigative journalism, basically just listened to the government and would print whatever the government told them. And the government, with the assistance of the mainstream media, portrayed Chelsea as mentally unstable, as a sexual deviant, and as a disgruntled soldier. But that was not the truth. And if it weren't for certain hardworking journalists such as Alexis O'Brien, Kevin Gustoza, and Glenn Greenwald, the public wouldn't have known the true story and the true version of the events. And the truth was that Chelsea didn't start off intending to release any information. You need to understand that Chelsea joined the military. She wasn't anti-war, but she was very proud of being in her country. And she didn't set out to put this information out. She didn't suffer from any mental disorder that caused her to disclose this information. The only thing that Chelsea suffered from during her deployment was having a conscience. And thankfully, I feel a little bit like a game show host, but maybe you can hear me better with this. But thankfully, Chelsea wasn't the only one that suffered from having a conscience. Others shared her views and her concerns, especially after seeing the Cloud murder video and having the access to the information that WikiLeaks eventually started to release. And most notably, a particular organization came to her defense. And that, of course, was Courage to Resist, and later the Private Manning Support Network. And right from the beginning, Courage to Resist pledged to support Chelsea and the needed funds for her defense. And at the time of this action, coming to the support of Chelsea wasn't a very popular move. Think back to what was happening around the 2010 timeframe. The government was openly saying, we should target Julian Assange. Why don't we just kill him? He's a terrorist. He's a high-tech terrorist. The government was pressuring Visa and MasterCard to basically shut down WikiLeaks. The fact that Courage to Resist would step forward for the person that was responsible for the information that WikiLeaks was publishing was a risky proposition. Certainly the government would not be happy with that. And so it was to their risk that they stepped forward, and thankfully they did step forward. Because without their support, we would not have been able to fund the defense that Chelsea received. And also without their support, Chelsea would have been in a much worse position. Like other whistleblowers in the past, Chelsea was being worn down by the attacks against her. If she didn't have Courage to Resist, there is absolutely no way she would have been able to hire civilian counsel. When I was first, digress a little bit, but when I was first contacted by this, there were other civilian counsel who were also contacted. And the amount that they were basically quoting for a retainer was somewhere in the neighborhood of around $300,000 to $500,000 in order to represent Chelsea. I don't know if that would have gotten me $300,000 to $500,000 worth of legal defense. My retainer was substantially lower than that. But there were different reasons why I was doing it. But make no mistake, without Courage to Resist, she would not have been able to fund a legal defense. And although I'm not happy with the outcome that she received, Without an aggressive legal defense, she probably would have been found guilty of aiding and abetting. She probably would have received life without the possibility of parole. So the fact that she does have a chance of having a normal life, in a large part, is due to the efforts of you, ordinary citizens who said, I want to come to her defense. I want to help her. And I want to thank you for that. So where do we go from here? The harsh reality for most whistleblowers is that soon after their time in the spotlight, if you will, is gone, their trial is over, the media moves on. Attention wanes. There's something else that draws the American public's attention away. And the media focuses in on that. And then soon after, both the whistleblower and the reason why they blew the whistle is forgotten. And consequently then, what happens is their sacrifice, the sacrifice that they made in order to inform us, is also basically gone for naught. There's no reason to allow that to happen to Chelsea. And I hope that we don't. So that's the danger we face right now. Are we going to let Chelsea be forgotten? Because in our form of government, we need whistleblowers. We really need whistleblowers in areas of our government that we do not have oversight. When you think about the executive and the ability of the executive to run what is essentially a classified form of government, there are very few watchdogs for that. The people that we rely upon to be the watchdogs is the press. And yet, unfortunately, frequently, the press is asleep. And they don't perform their function. So the only individual that actually helps us keep informed is a whistleblower. Somebody like Chelsea. But given the current war on whistleblowers, and this administration, as you know, has gone after more whistleblowers than any other administration, in fact, all other administrations combined. Given that current war, you have a process where, unless you're very courageous, or you feel like living in Russia, you're not going to step forward. You're not going to blow the whistle. And that's why we need advocacy groups that essentially do the groundwork to help support whistleblowers. And when whistleblowers do in fact need our financial support, we have organizations like Courage to Resist that steps forward to answer that call. And we need our private citizens, essentially you and me, to care, to actually want to ensure that if there is something that's wrong, that people know about it, and that we don't turn a blind eye to it. And if people need to be held accountable, they are. And as Chelsea had hoped for when she released this, maybe it will spark debates. Maybe it will spark worldwide reforms. And for me, as I sat in the restaurant writing out the general outline for this, I ended with, hopefully, maybe we can prevent red and white crosses from ever being put in the sand again. Now, all of this is possible if we just have the will to make it happen. And I hope that we can rise to that occasion. Because, you know, if the circumstances are right, we could have yet another war, maybe Iran, maybe North Korea, maybe some other place in this world. And if that is a requirement, there is no other choice, then that's one thing. But it needs to be something that we make a decision to do as an informed public. So I'm hopeful that this grassroots organization that's made up of people like you can keep the spotlight on what Chelsea has done, to make sure that she is not forgotten, to not forget the information that we learned from Chelsea. A lot of people have tried to essentially discount that information by saying it was stuff that we already knew. It wasn't telling us any new information. Well, if that were the case, why was it classified? It's important that we know this information, and it's important that when we hear it, we don't forget it, because that is what those who would rather have us in the dark are hoping for. They're hoping that we will just go on with our lives and forget what we know. I, for one, I'm hoping that we're up for the challenge. And that challenge is to make sure that we hold people accountable for the decisions they've made, and more importantly for the immediate factor for my client, to make sure that my client does not serve 35 years in a military prison. So that was a little disjointed. I usually have everything a little more prepared than that, but that was what really kind of hit me today. So I think questions?
So Mr. Coombs is going to take questions from the audience in just 1 minute. I want to take a moment to talk about what our next steps are today. As he mentioned, we're going to continue to work together, Courage to Resist, the Private Manning Support Network, and Mr. Coombs to make sure that Chelsea gets all the support she needs. She sacrificed a great deal in our interest, so it's the least we can do. The first thing we have to do is we have to keep making sure that her legal defense is funded. There will be legal appeals based on prosecutorial misconduct that happened during the trial. We think there is a decent chance of being able to reduce her sentence through the military appeals process. Mr. Coombs has been working on applying for clemency for Chelsea, both to the convening authority and to President Obama, who's said on numerous occasions that he wants to create the most transparent government in history. And he has also pledged to become an expert on the parole process, because Chelsea will be eligible for parole in, 7 or 8 years?
In 2 February 2020.
So in 2 February 2020. Too far in the future, but still substantially less time than 35 years. So one thing we want to do is raise money for the legal process. Number 2 thing we want to focus on right now is raising money to help with family visits. Unfortunately, Chelsea's family is not of substantial financial means. She has expressed interest that her mother and her aunt and other family, especially in Wales, be able to visit her more often in prison. So we have pledged to help them with that. Another issue is transitioning while she's in prison. For anybody who's somewhat familiar with transgender issues, you can imagine this is not the easiest thing to go through in a military prison. For anybody who, for whatever reason, knows very little about this, Chelsea began years ago questioning her gender, and this is something she has thought very long and hard and seriously about, and this would enable her to live a happier life. And we want to work with David Coombs to win her the right to have hormone therapy for gender dysphoria while she's in prison, appropriate medical treatment, and also legal name change is one of the things he's going to be working on. Finally, there will be a college fund. Part of the reason Chelsea joined the military initially was because she dreamed of attending college and with a family that couldn't help her to pay for that. She saw the military as one of her viable options. And while she's in prison, she's interested in enrolling in an institution on the East Coast, and we are interested in raising money to help with that process. So today, we're giving you an opportunity to help be part of this historic case and supporting a whistleblower that we think will be remembered in the history books for a long time to come. I know some of you have already given some money at the door. However, our goal is to raise $40,000 in order to cover all of these projects. Chelsea's birthday is coming up, actually. It's coming up on December 17th, and she will turn 26. And I believe this is her 3rd or 4th birthday in prison. And we would love to be able to tell her that these projects are taken care of for her 26th birthday. So my hope is that those of you who are able to can give an additional present for the holidays and for Chelsea's birthday. And we very much appreciate your help. There's a couple of volunteers who are coming around, and they will be collecting donations while Mr. Coombs begins to ask questions. Answer questions, excuse me. Oh, checks, great question. So you can write checks. The check should be addressed to Courage to Resist, and you should itemize it for Manning Defense.
An online donation?
You can also donate online at privatemanning.org. But since I'm here today and I work for the support network, we will receive the donation faster if you decide to give today. And so the volunteers are coming around with the baskets, and there should also be a volunteer with a microphone who's going to choose people one at a time to answer questions, to ask questions, pardon me. Who has the microphone, or who is going to be taking the microphone around?
Okay, if you have questions, please raise your hands.
And I'll start off by just simply saying, I'm so happy to be here. The disjointed nature of my initial remarks not only were the fact that they were an inspiration at roughly 12:30 or so today, but I'm still on East Coast time, so it's a little later for me than normal. But I will stay as long as there are questions, so I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
What were the charges that she was actually convicted of?
Well, it would be more easy to say what she wasn't, I guess, but which is unfortunate. She was charged with 22 offenses, specifications. The most serious of which was, of course, the aiding the enemy, the Article 104 offense. That she was found not guilty of. And she was found not guilty of some key offenses dealing with not only the Apache video, but also another video that dealt with a Grenari airstrike in Afghanistan. The things that she was found guilty of was essentially several specifications of 18 U.S.C. 1030, which is equivalent of a hacker type offense. It's basically using a government computer, or actually any computer, for an improper purpose. In this case, it was a government computer. And then also the Espionage Act, which is 18 U.S.C. 917. Several specifications of that. So when it was all said and done, with combining the offenses and whatnot, she still faced, at one point, I believe it was 70 years, and then, of course, she got 35 years.
She was not convicted of treason.
No, I mean, a lot of people would say treason, and they get that because the Espionage Act, the idea is if you commit espionage, then you must have committed treason. The Espionage Act is just, that's the name of the act, but that doesn't mean you've committed treason. She wasn't found guilty of treason. And there's a person with a mic, so they'll just take you, raise your hand.
Yes, my name is Joe, and I'm a member of Veterans for Peace. VFP. Just for a slip of the tongue and for a moment of clarity, I just wanted to repeat that to you. did give VFW.
What did I say? Well, I did. I said VFW. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because
Veterans for War would not sound good, would it?
Yeah.
That is a slip of the tongue.
So that was primarily my, just for a moment of clarity that I wanted, in case you continue to do this, just remember that Veterans for Peace considers Kelsey a veteran for peace. And we stand behind that.
Please, I was at day one of the trial, and of course I was very impressed with but also I was shocked by to what extent Julian Assange and WikiLeaks was, I mean, it seemed like they were on track. On day one, it was all about the logs and what that Julian and what was the litigation, talking to what was Julian's litigation. So, given that the leaking culture is part of this scenario, do you feel, and you mentioned that it's very important to support whistleblowers, and I also see them as a game changer. Do you see hackers and hacktivists like Jeremy Hammond exposing intelligence contractors' secrets that are outsourced? Do you see it also as a responsibility to support them?
Well, you know, I'd have to go case by case basis, but I will tell you that in our government now, because we classify so much, that there is a need for individuals who have the wherewithal and ability to get certain information to share that with us. To give you an idea for classification, there's roughly now, by some estimates, a little over 1 billion documents that are classified. According to our last statistics in 2012, there were 97 million classification determinations. And you think about, again, I talked about our private government that is the executive, that doesn't have a lot of overwatch. If it's classified, there isn't anybody paying attention to what's going on. There are organizations that get financed and get budgeted, and their budget is classified, so you won't know how much of your taxpayer dollar is going towards that. But as we classify more and more, then there is a need for individuals to educate us on the information we don't know. And oftentimes, even though I said these releases by Chelsea were still important, it wasn't just stuff that we already knew. When you did get the idea or the ability to see this information, I, for one, started to have to ask, why was this still classified? Certainly things that I was very familiar with, anything like a significant activity report from Iraq that happened, 6, 7 years earlier, there was no need for that to still be classified. And there's also, from a diplomacy standpoint, there's no need for certain things to be classified that we're talking decades later. Recently, I heard an individual talk about, and then I'll stop because I'm kind of going off on a diatribe, but a person talked about the fact that he just wanted to see, related to the diplomatic cables, he did a FOIA request and he was told that essentially we'll get back to you in 127 months. That was the estimate and when he could get a response. And it was stuff that was already released and available. Just did it to see what the response would be. So there is a definite need for our government to be more forthright with its citizens.
Hey, I also was at the trial. Great job. And you're right, it would have been a lot worse if we didn't have the honor of you serving.
Thank you.
But, okay, let's get Private Manning out of jail. So the media moves here and there. Let's get the media focused back on. And the two things that I can think of, one is Jay Leno and one is Crosby, Stills and Nash. Are you in touch with those guys? And Crosby, Stills and Nash wrote a song, at their concert here, their 40-year concert at the Greek Theater. They're dedicated it to him. They talked about it for Private Manning. And secondly, just to wrap up, you know, Jay Leno's had Jeremy Stagel on his show. He's been on Maher's show with Jeremy Stagel. I'm sure he would have you on to talk about what role you play in society and how he can get media. That'll get him out of jail, not my couple of dollars that I donate. So,
Okay. No, so the question is, okay, what are we doing now to get Chelsea out? And certainly you can bring a lot more attention based upon going on a show like Jay Leno or using individuals who have a bigger pulpit, if you will, that people will listen to. I will tell you that I have used big pulpits like the Today Show for talking about Chelsea's decision. I think here, when you're playing a game that you don't necessarily want to play, but it's the game you have to play, then for me, to be an effective advocate for her, I have to make sure that when I'm doing something, I'm not having an adverse effect on something else for her. And there are a couple things that are very important. That if the facility doesn't do what they're supposed to do, then you'll see me a lot more. I'll become much more vocal. The main thing right now is the hormone replacement therapy. Chelsea's requested that. They've had now 3 months to make a decision, and they keep kind of pushing that decision down the road, and we're now told sometime after the new year they'll make a decision. Well, if they don't make a decision soon, then my good friends at the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC, are going to assist me in bringing the fight to the government. So we're definitely going to do that, and then if that happens, I will become more vocal. The other thing I want to do is I want to convince, when you think about clemency for Chelsea, the very first step I have is submitting a clemency packet to the convening authority in this case, and he has the ability to reduce the sentence. I don't hold much hope for that. The reason why is in my now actually 17 years of military practice, I've rarely seen a convening authority take a step of disapproving findings and disapproving the sentence or reducing the sentence. But I'm going to lay it out to the convening authority in the way that I would if I wasn't worried about a Christmas card from him, and I'm not. So I'm going to tell him exactly why the sentence should be reduced. And when that doesn't, actually come to fruition, then the date I'm circling on my calendar is 2 February 2020. And there is absolutely no reason why Chelsea should not be a free person on 3 February. Absolutely no reason. You look at all of the reasons why you would grant parole to somebody, it is, are they a violent offender or not? No, Chelsea's not. Are they at risk of recidivism? Well, no. I don't think they're going to give her classified information. So Chelsea's not at risk of recidivism. Do they have support in the community? Chelsea has a lot of support in the community. Are they able to be somebody who would actually be productive in society and be somebody positive in society? Chelsea would be fantastic. So all the reasons why when you were looking at an inmate, and the last thing would be how do they behave while in confinement? Chelsea is a model inmate, no issues whatsoever. So I'm hopeful that she'll get out, but then again, I'll be very vocal at that point too. But I'll tell you, if Jay Leno could get my client out, I would call him Jay all the time.
Stand up, please.
Hi, I just wanted to know, and maybe I've been misinformed about this, but what about the LGBT community? I mean, I've been an activist with them for a very long time, and a lot of their nonprofits generate a ton of money. And so I'm wondering that, have they been active in what's going on with Chelsea? Because it would make sense to me that they would. So I guess you have any information on that.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I'll tell you that when Chelsea made her announcement, you had two camps. Neither one happened to be very good for Chelsea. You had the one camp that was, this is just another part of the service, and viewed it as a last-ditch attempt for attention for her. Then you had the other camp, and the other camp was the LGBT, and now LGBTI community, that really wasn't maybe as tuned in to what Chelsea did and why she did things. And what they heard was gender dysphoria, all these issues. Oh, Chelsea's blaming this on her gender dysphoria. So you had a backlash from that community saying, you know, that we have plenty of LGBTI individuals who serve their country honorably, would never do this, and you know, essentially undercutting the idea of Chelsea as a positive role model in that community. Thankfully, people became more informed, and anyone that would listen to me, that I could talk to, that was in that community, realized that gender dysphoria was not at all why Chelsea released her information. That was just part of the difficulties that she was struggling with during that deployment. But that was not the reason why she released anything. So the SPLC and the ACLU, who have transgender experts, thankfully stepped in to help, and they've done a lot to talk to the other communities that initially had an unfavorable view of Chelsea. Unfortunately, first impressions are sometimes lasting, and so there's still a lot of education to be done. But that is a community that I'm hopeful that if hormone therapy is denied, that community will rally for support.
I have a son in the military. He's been over there, done 3 tours of duty. He's at home now teaching young men and women how to recognize and disable IEPs. He's in a position of trying to help people keep safe when they're in a morally dubious war. He knows that everybody I've spoken to that has been over there would say the same thing. They're trying to do the honorable thing, but they're engaged in a dishonorable war. I think the wrong person is on trial. I think our government should be on trial.
We're honored to have you here and so grateful for what you've done and will continue to do. Can you comment on 2 of the stories that have been floating around since the beginning? One of them is that the people back in the States realized that she was quote unquote unstable and didn't want her to deploy, but the people in Iraq said they needed analysts, so send her anyway. The second story is that she tried to go up the chain of command and they blew her off, so she had recourse to WikiLeaks.
Okay, so the first thing also kind of highlights a fact, and so I had to deal with this fact during the trial. Chelsea was struggling with gender dysphoria, and she was struggling with that before she deployed. So, if you will, for a moment, put yourself in Chelsea's shoes. You are gay, and you're in the military during a don't ask, don't tell time. So right out of the gate, you can't really be yourself, because if you're yourself, you're going to get separated. Chelsea entered the Army not only for the hope of getting the GI Bill, but she also felt it was kind of her way of getting out of the poverty situation that she was in and making a better life for herself. She is a very, very intelligent person without the benefit of higher education. So she's the type of person that if she ever could get into the doors of higher learning, she would excel. So you're now a gay person in the military. With a conscience. And with a conscience. But then, now you add to that, you're at Fort Drum, New York. For those of you who don't know Fort Drum is, very near to the Canadian border, and there is nothing around it. And so you've got a very high proportion of just soldiers. There's no ability for you to go off of the base and be comfortable being yourself, because it's a very small fishbowl. Now add to that, you are struggling with gender dysphoria. And that was something that weighed down on Chelsea. And she had several times where she had problems, and those problems were recognized by her superiors as her being unstable. And they did make recommendations not to deploy her, and it was ignored. And when she was in Iraq, those same problems surfaced, and again, the person who had responsibility over her basically ignored all of the advice from his subordinates and kept putting her in a bad situation time and time again. Now, does that, a lot of people believed I was trying to say mental instability is why she did it. No. I brought that up to show that she was going through a lot of things that in the military, regardless of the reasons, we should have recognized as her superiors that we had a soldier that needed to be taken care of. And when I say taken care of, you looked after your soldier. See what's wrong with them, help them out. And that was not being done. And so the military, for that failure, not that it's a excuse being offered by us for her conscious decision to do what she thought was right. But if the military had stepped forward and done what it should have done, she would not have been in that situation. Now, we would have been in the dark on a lot of things. So for us as a citizen, we're benefited by the fact that they didn't do that. But that was a reality. And so that's why that was brought up, and it is a fact. And I'm sorry, the second part?
It was held that she tried to
Okay.
go up the chain of command, but they blew her up.
She did with regards to the rest of the 15 Iraqis that were publishing basically literature on where did the money go. They were talking about the Maliki government and the fact that it was basically a very fraudulent government that was taking all the money and not spending it the way it should. And these people were arrested, and Chelsea was assigned essentially to help the Iraqi police force identify more individuals. So she had an interpreter take the literature that was printed and basically translate it. And once she saw the translation, she realized these are not, people trying to overthrow the Iraqi government. They're what we might consider to be journalists. The pamphleteers who are printing this stuff in their home and going out and spreading the word. And so Chelsea went to her superior and said, oh, wait a second, we shouldn't be helping Iraq at all. The Iraqi police force identified these individuals. And so when she went to her superior on that, she was told essentially, shut up and help us identify more people. So that was a driving force in Chelsea's decision.
I just had a quick question about what is your access to her? Is she able to release regular statements? That's possibly a way to keep her in the public eye. And then your suggestions on how to keep pressure on the Obama administration, because 7 years is a long time. So.
All right. So my access to her. She calls me, she has a calling card. And she has a list of numbers that she's authorized to call. And part of the funds that I receive, I send money to ensure that she always has a calling card with funds on it. So she can call me anytime she wants. In fact, she called me here right before we started today. Wish me luck, which was nice of her. And I talked to her twice earlier today. Usually I speak to her about 3 times a week. Sometimes more, sometimes less. As far as us keeping her in the public eye, she can release statements. But again, everything has to be thought through. I know some people would have liked, especially in sentencing, for us to basically get up and say, I released it on happy I released it. I would release it again tomorrow if it gave me an opportunity. Go ahead, Judge Simpson. That was not what I advised her to do. And of course, we're still in that game. We're still confined by always thinking through how can this be used against her. So a recent example that Emma brought out, the Time magazine. What are you thankful for? I was approached by Time to see if she would be willing to do that. And I thought it was a great idea because how can you take that? You know, how can you hold that against her that she's just saying what she's thankful for? So we agreed to do it. Chelsea wrote it up. I reviewed it. I made sure there was no issues that weren't. And so everything she wrote went forward. But everything we do, we have to think through to that level. So if I knew for a fact that she would get out to February 2020, I think I might be more aggressive in how we push things. But I don't know that's for a fact. For all I know, the government would still say she's a risk, and they would keep her in longer. So.
I was wondering, do you think more people will be arrested as a consequence of these leaks, and how can we protect one another if we've shared or tweeted these links and things over time?
Yeah, well, in regards to what Chelsea released, I don't think so. There was, and you might have heard of it, the government itself told employees basically, do not go to the WikiLeaks site, and that would be grounds for termination. Most alarming to me was university presidents putting out information to their student body, telling them not to go to WikiLeaks and that it would impact their ability to get federal student loans, perhaps. You know, that for me, that's just so troubling that you would want to silence information like that. It's basically a form of blackmail against students who were wanting to be informed. I think that's the best audience for this information. I don't think there would be any criminal action against anybody for stuff that's already released. And truth be told, if the government were honest about things, shortly after the stuff being released, they would have just declassified it. And because, you know, it's out, it's, you know, in my mind, it didn't cause damage, and it really couldn't. There were some isolated areas where perhaps it would cause discomfort for our government, but other than that, not much. But they didn't declassify it. They still haven't. And I think initially for the trial was because that made it more difficult for us, the defense. And now I think it just makes it more supportive for them in their message that this was classified and still should be classified and we still treat it as such.
Yeah, you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking how I have 3 children that are Chelsea's age. She must have been, what, 22 or 21? What was her social emotional development level with, you know, what's your take on it with, you know, what she went through? Because, I mean, I try to think of my kids making that decision. That's a huge decision to make at that age.
Yeah. So, you know, so that was another thing that we brought out that it was not necessarily well received by everybody, and that was a term called post-adolescent idolism. That was a central part of our sentencing case. The idea that an individual, and you think back to all of us probably, and some of us maybe in the audience still in that age bracket, but you know, in your 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old age, you can change the world. You know what? You can make a difference. There are injustices in this world and we can correct them. And if only we all just got together, it would be so much better. Everyone would see the wisdom in it and we would all do the right thing. That's the emotional level that Chelsea was in. And she thought, what better way to do that than go into the military? I can help people. I can help a country that needs our help. And I can make a difference. And I I can also improve my life. So that's the level that she was in. And when I first met her in person, it was in Quantico. And by that time, Chelsea was definitely suffering from the conditions that she was in. And I didn't really see her personality, because then it was more her treating me as, you're my attorney, and it was just all business, and she really didn't want to talk about anything else. I think almost in her mind it was, if I don't engage in anything that might be pleasant, then I won't miss it. So she didn't want to talk about anything, just tell me about the case, tell me about what you're doing. That's it. So once she got out of Quantico, then her personality came out. I started to know her better, and then we became friends. And that was really when she was at Leavenworth, and I could pull her out of the confined facility and actually have her come into the trial defense office. We could have small things like pleasantries like pizza, where she could actually get Dr. Pepper. Her favorite drink was cherry Dr. Pepper. So she could have those small things and then actually just relate to me as a normal person. But really from that time till the end of the case, she has advanced so far. And I think a lot of that is because now she was surrounded by people that cared about her. And she finally realized, I do have people that do care about me. And she was surrounded by people that she could talk to and wouldn't be judged. And she could be herself. And didn't have to hide anything, because we knew everything about her. And so that's the Chelsea that I know now. And happy to know. So, here, you can raise your hand a lot.
I'm sorry.
Well,
sure.
Oh, he's got a mic on him already. That's not a mic. Okay, go ahead and ask him.
This is for the Progressive magazine, so 3 quick ones. You haven't mentioned an appeal per se. Is there an appeal?
Okay. All right. There will be. We have to do, I won't belabor you with a lot of information, but there will be an appeal. More than likely that appeal process will start sometime late 2014, early 2015. So the wheels of justice, and especially at the appellate level, move very, very slowly. We don't even have a record of trial yet, although we should be getting that shortly. That's authenticated, and that kind of starts the process.
And Julian Assange was brought up before. Do you have any information or suspicions that charges are being prepared against Julian Assange and or WikiLeaks?
I don't have any information on that. I know what everyone else knows, that there's been a grand jury that's been impaneled and have been apparently looking at stuff for quite some time. I wouldn't be surprised if they have a secret indictment, if he ever leaves the embassy and they get their hands on him. I think we'll all know that fact.
Thank you. And I'm wondering how you feel, and if you've discussed it with Chelsea, how she feels about the following in terms of the old expression of killing the messenger. Chelsea revealed to the world the collateral murder videotape, and I'm a former Reuters stringer. And Chelsea had the book thrown at her. Have any charges ever been laid against those U.S. personnel who were involved in the collateral murder incident? And if not, how do you and how does Chelsea feel about the person who reveals what appears to be war crimes being punished, but the people who committed the war crimes getting away scot-free?
I'll say that no, there are no charges against anybody. When I saw the video, I think I had kind of the same reaction of a lot of people to that video. During the trial, I played the video during sentencing to talk about what you were seeing. If you look at it and you see it as human beings, real people who are just going about their everyday life, you become troubled by that. Particularly if you go back to the 2007 timeframe when that happened. From a historical standpoint, that was the surge, if you remember, where we decided we're going to put a whole bunch more troops, and that's going to make the difference in Iraq. There is a belief, and I think it bears out to be proven when you see some of the video footage and probably think we haven't seen, that not only with the surge, there was a relaxation of the rules of engagement. And the rules of engagement were now, instead of just killing somebody who has hostile intent or hostile act against you, if they're carrying a weapon, that's it. Kill them. They're a target. They're a legitimate target. And so let's just use what we know, the video. You see the crew identify individuals with weapons. Now, I'm just thinking to myself, if I'm in Iraq, if I live there, and I know there's some good guys and bad guys, I might arm myself. As just an everyday citizen, I might have my own weapon just in case I come across a group of people that don't like me based upon my religion or my family. So that automatically targets you. But more problematic for me, if you watch that video, everything is problematic, but this is particularly hard for me. I thought about this a lot. There is a gentleman who's walking down the street, and this is after what you see in the courtyard. They are shooting Hellfire missiles into a building. And they're shooting those missiles into a building that they don't know for sure who's in the building. It's just that they saw someone walk in there with a weapon. So it must be a terrorist hotspot, let's blow the building up. And so they're shooting these missiles in there, and after firing two, they come back around, and they're setting up to shoot another one. And there's a guy walking down the street. And you watch him walking, and you can see him walk into the viewfinder of the Apache helicopter. And then they fire. And while this guy is walking, and you see it hit the building, and you see the guy obliterated. And he never saw that coming. Never ever saw that coming. His crime was he walked down the sidewalk. It's just heartening. And that is part of the evil of war. Sometimes, like I said, war is necessary perhaps, if you believe that. And I would believe that if I were talking, back in the day of Hitler, I would see, we've got to go to war over that. We can't let that country and the leader at that time do what he's doing. But when you see stuff like that's really what drives home to me, that you got to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons and you're doing it the right way. In 2007, a lot of things happened that we knew the full scope of it that would be problematic. The SIG Acts talked a little bit about that. That's my personal belief. Chelsea hasn't spoken to me, so I won't presume to speak for her about that. But she definitely was troubled by that. That's why she released it. So now I'll go with